At 6:30 on a warm July evening, two little girls were playing outside a condominium complex in Stanton, California. One was 5 years old. Her name was Samantha Runnion. A car passed them once. Then it turned around. The driver stepped out and asked a question that sounded harmless. "Have you seen a little puppy?" Samantha asked him what the puppy looked like. Seconds later, she was gone. Her 6-year-old friend watched in horror as the man grabbed Samantha, forced her into his car, and sped away. There was no long conversation, no chance for an adult to step in, no time to write down a license plate. Just one child's memory, a greenish car, and a question about a lost puppy. By the next day, the search for Samantha would become the nightmare every parent hopes never comes true. But this case did not end because a stranger suddenly confessed. It ended because investigators followed a trail that looked ordinary at first. A bank withdrawal, gas station stops, a motel check-in, a sketch on television, and evidence that could not be explained away. And before this story is over, you will see how one ordinary summer evening became a case that changed the way many California families thought about child safety. This is the case of Samantha Runnion, and it begins not with a dark alley or an abandoned road, but with a place that was supposed to feel safe. Home. July 15th, 2002, began like any other summer day in Southern California. Samantha was 5 years old. She was outside the Smoke Tree condominium complex in Stanton with a friend who was only 1 year older. They were doing what children do in the summertime, playing close to home, in familiar surroundings. There was no reason for either child to think danger was coming. Then the car appeared. According to the court record, the driver passed the girls, went around the block, and came back. That second pass mattered. It suggested he had seen them, considered what he was about to do, and returned with a plan. He got out and used the missing puppy story. It is one of the most painful details in this case, because it reminds us how easily a child's kindness can be used against them. Samantha did not walk toward danger because she was reckless. She responded to an adult who appeared to need help. Then the situation changed in an instant. The man grabbed her. Samantha screamed and struggled as he forced her into the car. Her friend was left behind, terrified, with only moments of information to give police. Think about the weight placed on that child in the first minutes of the investigation. She could not give detectives a name. She did not have a license plate. She could only describe what she had seen. A man, a car, the question about the puppy, and the moment Samantha disappeared. For Samantha's family, those first hours must have felt impossible. A child could be playing outside one moment and be gone the next, and for law enforcement, the clock was already working against them. News of the abduction spread quickly. Investigators had a witness, but she was a 6-year-old child who had just experienced something traumatic. They worked with her to develop a composite sketch of the suspect. It was not perfect. It was never going to be perfect, but it gave the public something to look at. At that point, every lead mattered. A car that looked close enough. A person who seemed familiar. A tip from someone who had seen the sketch on television. The search was no longer only about finding a missing child. It was about identifying a man who had taken her in broad daylight, from the place where she should have been safest. Then, the next day, the search ended in the worst possible way. Samantha was found in a remote area near Lake Elsinore, close to Killen Truck Trail and Ortega Highway. She had been killed. We do not need graphic images to understand the devastation of that discovery. A 5-year-old child who had been laughing and playing near home the evening before was gone. Her family had lost Samantha. Her friend had lost a piece of her childhood, and an entire community had been forced to face a terrifying question. Who could do this? And how had he disappeared so quickly after taking her? The answer would not come from one dramatic clue. It would come from details. The 6-year-old witness, could not identify a suspect by name, but she had helped create a composite drawing. When that sketch was broadcast, a woman named Tammy saw it and contacted police. She believed the man they were looking for might be Alejandro Avila. It was not yet a conviction. It was not proof. It was a lead, the kind that must be tested carefully. Investigators began building a picture of Avila's movements on July 15th. That is where the case becomes remarkably methodical. Instead of relying only on memory, detectives turned to records. They reviewed bank activity. They looked at service station stops. They examined where he had gone and when he had gone there. The timeline showed that Avila withdrew money from an ATM in Lake Elsinore at 5:18 that afternoon. The record also placed him at 2 service stations. Later, he checked into a Comfort Inn in Temecula, shortly after 9 o'clock that night. At first, those may sound like unrelated errands, but detectives asked a different question. Could those ordinary stops fit the route from Lake Elsinore to Stanton, to the remote location where Samantha was found, and then to the motel? So they recreated the drive. Not in theory, in real time. They left from the ATM at the same minute, stopped where the record said the vehicle had stopped, went to the condominium complex, went to the remote location, and then continued toward the motel. The full route was 202 miles. With the stops, it took roughly 3 hours and 40 minutes. And it fit. Their reconstruction placed the vehicle at the condominium complex at 6:17 p.m., just before Samantha was abducted around 6:30. After the later stops, it put them at the motel before 9 o'clock. A case like this can never rest on one piece of evidence. The defense will challenge it. A jury should challenge it. That is why investigators need independent facts that point in the same direction. In Samantha's case, the path started to narrow. The car connected to Avila was not an exact match to every part of the child witness's description, but it was similar in important ways, and investigators determined it could have made tire tracks found near the recovery site. The route fit the timing. The sketch had produced a name, and then forensic evidence entered the picture. According to the California Supreme Court's account of the trial evidence, DNA consistent with Samantha's was found in multiple places in Avila's car. The court described the frequency as fewer than 1 person in a trillion. DNA consistent with Avila's was found beneath Samantha's fingernails, with a frequency of roughly 1 person in 600 million. There were also shoe print and footprint comparisons. Those findings, by themselves, were not the whole case. But the point is that the investigation was not built around a single witness or one guess. It was built around a converging pattern. A child witness saw the abduction. A sketch led to a tip. Financial and travel records created a timeline. That timeline fit the route between the abduction, the recovery location, and the motel. Forensic evidence tied Samantha to the car and connected the suspect to her. The more investigators looked, the harder it became to separate the suspect from the crime. And for Samantha's family, the case was now moving from an unbearable search toward an equally painful courtroom process. By the time the case reached trial, it had already become widely known far beyond Stanton. The details were devastating. The public response was enormous, and that created a difficult responsibility for the court. The jurors had to judge the evidence, not the emotion surrounding the case. The prosecution's case was clear. They argued that Avila had kidnapped Samantha, committed sexual crimes against her, and murdered her. The defense challenged parts of the evidence and the ability to receive a fair trial amid intense media coverage. That is how the justice system is meant to work. Even in the most terrible cases, the evidence must be tested. But the evidence presented to the jury did not stand alone. It reinforced itself. The timeline did not exist without the records. The records mattered because of the route. The route mattered because it fit the time of the abduction. The forensic evidence mattered because it was physical, not simply recollection. And the child witness mattered, because she gave investigators the first description of the person who had taken Samantha away. A jury convicted Alejandro Avila of kidnapping, 2 counts of lewd acts on a child, and murder with special circumstances. After the penalty phase, the court imposed a death sentence. Years later, in 2014, the California Supreme Court reviewed the case and affirmed the judgment. But no court ruling can repair what was taken from Samantha's family. A verdict can identify responsibility. It can impose punishment. It cannot return a child to the people who loved her. There is something about this case that stays with people, not only because of the horror of what happened, but because the beginning is so ordinary. A summer evening, a child outside her home, a friendly question about a missing puppy. No parent can watch this story and not feel the urge to imagine how they would have reacted. No one wants to believe that a child can be targeted so quickly, in a space that looks so normal. But we should be careful here. The lesson is not that children should be afraid of every stranger. The lesson is that children deserve simple, practiced safety rules, and adults deserve systems that respond fast when a child is in danger. Samantha's case was part of a larger moment in the early 2000s, when Americans were confronting the urgency of child abduction cases. In California, the case helped galvanize support for a statewide Amber Alert response. And her mother, Erin Runnion, did something that many people would find almost impossible after such loss. She turned grief into advocacy. Through the Joyful Child Foundation, she continued work focused on helping prevent crimes against children. That does not make the story inspiring in any easy sense. Nothing can make a tragedy like this acceptable. But it does show that Samantha's life was never reduced to a case file. She was loved, she was remembered, and her name became connected to efforts to protect other children. True crime often makes a mistake. It spends so much time explaining the offender that the victim slowly disappears from the story. So before we close, it is important to put the focus where it belongs. Samantha Runnion was 5 years old. She should have been remembered for the life she was living, not for the moment a violent person took it from her. She should have been able to grow older, to go to school, to have friendships that lasted decades, to become whoever she wanted to become. Instead, her name became known because an adult exploited the trust of a child. But that does not make him the most important person in this story. Samantha is, and her friend, who had to carry the memory of seeing the abduction, and her family, who had to enter a world no family should ever have to navigate. Searches, interviews, public attention, courtrooms, and years of legal proceedings. The power of this case is not in the horror. It is in the reminder that a child's safety is not a small issue. It is a community responsibility. When children are outside, adults pay attention. When a child says something feels wrong, adults listen. When there is a missing child alert, people do not assume someone else will take action. Those actions do not guarantee a perfect world, but they can create the seconds, the witnesses, and the responses that make a difference. The man who took Samantha Runnion away that evening used a simple lie about a puppy, but the investigation that followed was built on truth. A child's memory, a sketch, a public tip, a timeline reconstructed mile by mile, and forensic evidence that brought the case into a courtroom. Samantha's case ended with a conviction, yet it should never be described as a happy ending. The real ending is harder than that. It is a family who lost a daughter, a community that learned how quickly normal life can be shattered, and a mother who kept saying, through her work, that children deserve to be safe. So when you remember this case, remember Samantha not only as the little girl who was taken, remember her as the child whose name helped push thousands of adults to pay closer attention, to teach safer choices, to respond faster, and to protect the children in front of them. Samantha Runnion was 5 years old. She deserved a lifetime. Rest in peace, Samantha. If this story stayed with you, share it responsibly, so the focus remains on protecting children, honoring victims, and never treating their lives as entertainment.